Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. Yesterday, myself, the Adjutant General, General Menke, and Command Sergeant Major Whitehead returned from a trip to Kuwait where we visited members of the Minnesota National Guard, the 346 Regional Support Group, serving there in support of OIS and OSS. I have to tell you, if you want to be proud of Minnesotans to see them standing tall in that, we also had the opportunity to talk to many of our partner nations, our coalition partners who depend on the work of the RSG that was there to provide life support and all of the things necessary for operations, not just at Camp Arif Jan in Kuwait, but throughout the theater of operations. The admiration they have for the women and men of the Minnesota National Guard was apparent. The friendships that have been developed, the timing probably couldn't have been better when you have the international community living in the compound there. There was an awful lot of talk about the World Cup at that time, but an awful lot of camaraderie around a mission that is critically important, establishing the safety and security of the transition of the Iraqi government and making sure that those elements that want to do harm, especially to the allied nations, do not have a chance to regroup in a 2.0 situation, ISIS 2.0, if you will. So it's an incredibly important operation. As it was explained to us as we went through our briefings, this might quite honestly be one of the most complex operations of partner nations, over 80 of them, 25 of them active in theater, and a lot of that coordination is around the work that the 346 was doing to provide that. So I have to tell you, the mission, the critical importance of it, and the central mission that this support group was providing to them, and then the feedback that we were getting both from coalition partners, and we had the opportunity to spend some time with General Frank, who publicly stated, he said he did not care if people from other states heard this, because he said that they should look to Minnesota as the guide on how to get things done. Because his take was, when the Minnesota National Guard's assigned to a mission, the folks involved with it know it'll be done right and professionally. That's something that all Minnesotans should be really proud of. It's also something during the holiday season we should pause just a little bit. Our goal was to be there to take thanks to these folks, to see what they needed, to see how the mission was going, but also to make clear back to Minnesotans here, these are your neighbors, and they've got spouses back home, they've got children and family, they're away from over the holidays. They know what they sign up for, and these are families that are very, very fiercely independent and fiercely self-sufficient, but it's not to say that a little bit of thank you and a little bit of maybe volunteering, whether it's shoveling that driveway, or if you know there's a child that's got a parent that's out of the country and serving this state during this time, maybe just a little extra for them to say something or to do a little something for them. The spirits were high. The commitment to the mission was good. They were obviously probably happier when on Saturday than they were Sunday, because the Viking season has been a central point for many of them. So yesterday might have been a bit disappointing. But there's just a real attachment to home, a real sense of missing what it'd be like around the holidays, but also a sense of pride in the mission that they've been doing. And it's, when you think about this, it's these life things that you miss that many of us get to do because they're willing to serve. There was a young troop who was married a month before they left and not been with their spouse since April. And there was a lieutenant colonel who's now the mayor of Arif Jan, who as a young troop was my driver as a platoon sergeant. The world has a strange way of working, and Lieutenant Colonel Rigney mentioned that he hasn't seen his new grandbaby, was born during his deployment. So those are the things that are happening during the life session. Those are the things we can support back here. I can tell you that the training, the clarity of the mission, the support that our troops are getting is second to none. They're keeping them safe. They heard from the general and they heard from the sergeant major. To finish strong, to not get complacent in the final end of their deployment, and to get them back home safely. And I think it shows that over the last 3 years, I think many Minnesotans have become much more familiar with the National Guard, but may not be as familiar with what we call their Title X, their federal responsibility. The Minnesota National Guard and the American National Guard is a unique thing. When we were talking with a British officer, he said he could only dream of having the system that we have, where we have these citizen soldiers who possess incredible skills on the civilian side and then bring them into the military side of things to work. And I think it's just really important to think about, and I've had people tell me this, that their exposure to the Guard was being there as order was restored at the end of May in 2020. They were there when they received their vaccination from someone in the National Guard, and their parents were being cared for in long-term care facility by National Guard. When I asked our troops at a meeting we were having with them, how many of them served on 1, 2, or 3 of those missions I just mentioned, many hands went up. And now they're in the Middle Eastern Theater of Operations working with our allies to make sure we are part of establishing world peace and security throughout our societies across Europe, United States, the rest of the world. So we have an incredible debt of gratitude. We're also very cognizant here. That means the state of Minnesota needs to be there to support them. I'm incredibly proud of the legislature and all that we were able to do last year in a budget around the National Guard, from providing retention bonuses to post 9/11 bonuses to making sure that the health care was provided, and then the long-term thinking of the veterans' homes, those types of things. So, and don't think that that doesn't go unnoticed, that these folks are truly appreciative that, that their service is not forgotten. And I think it's sometimes easy, not that people mean anything by it, it's easy to believe that, that we're not involved in these overseas missions or that there's somehow stability here. These are still dangerous operations that need the professionalism that the Minnesota National Guard provides. And I'm going to turn this over now to General Menke, who can describe a little bit of this. I think it's pretty stunning, and I think the General's going to do a bit of a rundown on this, of all of the Title X missions that we're involved with, in addition to everything that's been asked at home. So I'm proud to report, and I hope the families of those troops, they know who they are, who are deployed. They are standing tall, they are doing the job, they have earned the respect of all of our peers and allies. They're healthy, they're safe, and more than anything else, they are ready to come home to you, and we're gonna get them there in a very short amount of time. With that, the Adjutant General of the State of Minnesota, Sean Menke.
Thank you, sir. Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and I would echo that I'm extremely proud of the performance of the 347th Regional Support Group and the 147th Human Resources Personnel Company. So the 147th is running the theater gateway over there. So what that means is every service member that processes through the CENTCOM area of responsibility processes through there, and they're scanned in, and that way they're entitled to all the benefits that they get. And then when they leave theater, they're scanned out through that same company and they return home. And then the 347th Regional Support Group is really providing theater logistics. And we all know without logistics, you run out of steam pretty quick. So everything from coordination and contracting for fuel, for food, for shipping stuff throughout the theater of operations. And as the governor articulated, I couldn't be more proud of the professionalism that they are displaying in doing this mission. Accolades from the coalition partners as well as their peers, and of course the customer on the ground, and that's our soldiers and airmen up there that are doing supporting the CENTCOM mission. And I would just echo in this time as a service member, when they are deployed over the holidays, it's often a difficult time for not only themselves but for their family members. So I would just like to personally thank all the family members and the employers of these great soldiers that are over there for their support and continued support. And we acknowledge the sacrifice that you are making to support this federal mission as a vital part of our national interest. Thank you. I'll be followed by Command Chief Master Sergeant Lisa Erickson, the State of Minnesota Command Senior Enlisted Leader.
All right, yes, I would just like to echo the General's comments and focus on the families and friends of our service members who are deployed. As service members, it's easy. We step away, we shed all of our responsibilities of home, and our families are left to pick up those pieces. So really our thoughts and prayers are with the families and friends of all those who are deployed, and especially their employers. Because we know when we step away from our civilian jobs, our employers are also suffering. They're down a worker as well. So thinking of all the employers through this holiday season of our soldiers that are deployed. Thank you. I will be followed by Command Sergeant Major Whitehead.
You know, I'd like to echo what the governor and the adjutant general has stated. When I had the opportunity to go over and see him this last week, the morale is so high. Yes, they're counting the days to get, come back home, be with their loved ones, their kids. As the governor pointed out, some individuals haven't even held their first baby yet. So they're getting the opportunity to come back home and do that. But to the families out there, your loved ones are doing great. They're excited to coming home. They'll be here to you back home. This is a tough time, especially when 70% of these soldiers is the first time deploying. So the parents, their significant others, experiencing this deployment for the first time, keep those families and employers in your thoughts and prayers, because at the end of the day, they made a huge commitment to not only prior to this deployment, stepping up on all the things that the state of Minnesota needed, but then they also answered the call to duty to meet our federal mission. So I want to take this time to thank each and every one of them that actually stepped up and is doing a knockout job at the complex mission that they're doing with a small team. And when we got the briefs to hear that these small team is doing the equivalent to almost double what they usually get over there, and we're doing it with the half of that, that just shows how well Minnesota does on everything we do. So to echo what everybody said, thank you all to the soldiers, but more importantly, thank you to the family and employers that have given up and making the same sacrifice to let their loved one go off and allow us the freedom that we have today. So thank you all.
Thank you, Command Sergeant Major. Chief Erickson, General Menke, apologies on the 347th. 40 hours of no sleep when you're going, so we get the nomenclatures right on all this. And I would just echo everything they said. I would make a call to Minnesota's employers. I know you're looking for employees. Some of these folks, because of the transition from college or where they were with jobs, I talked to several of them, will be coming back and will be looking for work. You're not going to find a better employee. You're not going to find a more dedicated self-starter than these folks. So I know that many of our companies stepped up on our hiring veterans campaigns, and that was big, especially the early parts of this century after September 11th, that there was a real push for that. One of my concerns and one of the reasons for this trip is to remind folks that we are still serving in this theater. We are still doing the hard work that keeps us safe. And if you have seen it, the number of folks that are engaging in the international terrorism has been suppressed because of these missions. When these folks come home, do what all we can to get them hired. You'll have a great employee. With that, we'd be glad to answer some questions. Yes.
Just legit, some of the numbers, just how many?
It's roughly in the ballpark of about 100 total Minnesotans that are in the Minnesota National Guard serving over there, roughly, between the two organizations that I talked about.
And when are they expected to be home?
They should be back stateside, if things go according to plan, within 2 months. 2 months? They should be home within 2 months. And absolutely. So our human resources company is going to be over there longer because they just got to theater roughly in October.
And you said 70% of them have not been overseas before?
This is their first deployment with the Minnesota National Guard for about 70% of the soldiers that are over there. Absolutely correct.
What was their response to seeing the governor? You can tell me, Governor. I mean,
well, I will tell you, they were extremely excited to see the governor, and the governor, as being a former member of the Minnesota National Guard, can certainly relate. But it was, for him to take time out of his busy schedule and go over there, because we were only on the ground there, really 2 days with the soldiers, but we were traveling probably longer than that to get there and home. So they're very appreciative of the time that and it's important. It is that they see the support that they have from the state and from us, and as a representation of the people of Minnesota. And I will tell you, in the Guard, it's actions, not talk. So I got to lead the fun run, and some of them asked me to slow down a little bit. So that was good. And I'm going to brag on this because it was my teammates too, though. We won the trivia contest, Minnesota Trivia. And one of them said to me, he goes, I would certainly hope so you'd win this as the governor of Minnesota. So that was really good. So these activities, though, was really nice. They provided a barbecue, hot dogs and hamburgers, played Minnesota Trivia, and then had the opportunity to give some awards to these outstanding troops. And it was a real honor to have Lieutenant General Frank there with his Sergeant Major to talk about this and to thank these folks. Soldiers are not, and airmen are not the folks that want the pat on the back, but this is hard work. When you hear some of the stories, we had E5s doing the work of E8s. And again, this contingent that's doing a lot of this work should be about twice as many, just don't have the troops to do it. They're still continuing to carry it out. And I think what's really interesting here, when the next rotation goes in, of the 5 major commands that are working this, all 5 will be National Guard. So for Americans who think that the National Guard's there to back up the regular Army, right now it's one regular Army unit and 4 National Guard. By the end of next month, it'll be 5 run by the National Guard. So that's why it's really important, and I keep saying this too, is we have to be very careful here thinking about deployments, because these are scheduled by our partners at the DOD and the Department of the Army and Air Force as they're scheduling these deployments. And a lot of training and preparation and advance work goes into this. And a lot of these folks over these missions that have happened during these times, we're doing that training and we're pulled out of that to provide public safety support, provide vaccination support, and long-term care. So, and those are really
from their civilian jobs to their military education to their military jobs. I think it's important for Minnesotans to realize how really complex having that dual responsibility of federal, state, Title 32 and Title 10 is. And so I couldn't tell you how proud I am. It's a very Minnesota thing, but to hear General Frank very publicly, very openly state the fact that this is a unit that is really counted on. And you've heard me mention this, we have a proportionally large National Guard for the size of our state. And I've also been bragging about this in a really tough economy where it's hard to find employees. 2 states are doing better than the rest in terms of recruitment, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's Texas and Minnesota are continuing to be able to deliver. So it's a good story.
Governor, on the topic of vaccinations, last week, well, maybe while you were gone, the House voted in Washington to pull back on the vaccination requirements for active duty military, and it seems to me that that's moving ahead and may reach the president. What does that do to the National Guard requirement? Is that something you dictate or they dictate?
Yeah, we've not spoken formally. I'll maybe turn to General Menke on this because we did speak about this. It was coming out on Wednesday as we were in the air. We were talking about this. So I'll turn to General Menke a little bit.
Yeah, and I think, whatever comes out of law and whatever's directed by the Department of Defense and the United States Army and Air Force are the policies that we follow. So, historically, we're a rule-following organization in the Minnesota National Guard, so whatever rules are prescribed to us, we will adamantly follow. And so, as that works, if it says that they're not needed, the vaccine, I think we will retain them in our organization. Right now, we're working through the process on the existing policy that's in place. And I think right now that's kind of on hold until we figure out what's coming out of the legislature and from really the Department of Defense and the Department of the Army and the Air Force.
Can you say what the percentage of your members have met the requirement as it is, or how many did not?
Yeah, so there, it's a small percentage. I would say our fully vaccinated rate is, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it's well over 95%.
Governor?
In the past 3 years or so, we've seen the Guard do things, everything from, keeping the peace in the streets under very difficult circumstances to having to go into nursing homes under very difficult circumstances, and then this kind of a deployment, which I think we think of as more standard. I'm just wondering if you could address that sweep of different jobs they've done, how that's going with morale, and also how that's affecting recruiting. Does that help it or hinder it at all?
So I would tell you that, 98% of our funding is federally funded. So we train for our federal mission, and that's the typical mission that's going on right now with the 347th RSG and the 147th Human Resource Company. And that's across the board in the state of Minnesota. So when we have other missions that we do for state active duty, you mentioned the civil unrest, the nursing home support, and all the stuff surrounding COVID, as well as the flood support up in International Falls and, fire support when we've done that in the past with our aviation. I would tell you that every time we push the button on the Minnesota National Guard, it has an effect. But we are, as of today, we're about 107% on the Army side. So for every 100 slots of guardsmen, we have about 107. And that number has gone down a little bit. And with COVID, our recruiting efforts were probably hampered a little bit without access to schools and whatnot. But we're having a good this year so far. We made our objectives for October and November, and we're looking good in December. But I would say that it's probably a little bit different way of doing business. So I'm saying it's having an effect, but we're altering the way that we're going out and recruiting, and we're altering the way that we're focusing more on retention to keep these soldiers once they're trained in the Minnesota National Guard.
That's a great question, isn't it?
Well, are they apprehensive about maybe doing some of this civil unrest stuff? God, that we don't know if that's going to come, or going into nursing homes at the height of when nobody had.
And I would tell you, when the governor asked us to go into the nursing homes to do long-term care support, I was adamantly against that, and we had some conversations on that. But at the end of the day, the governor's the commander-in-chief, and so we trained our service members and put them in there. And I would tell you, some of the conversations I had with these service members when they were performing that care, they felt value added. They knew why they were there, and I think some of them, it's making them want to stay in the Guard longer because they get that sense of being able to work in their community, work at the national level, and then, of course, in a mission like this, deploy internationally and do their federal mission. So I think that's a benefit of being in the Guard. Obviously, I'm biased because I'm in the Minnesota National Guard, but in the Guard, you truly get to do some unique things, whether it's stuff in support of COVID or flooding, civil unrest. And I would say that from my perspective, I understand why we were out there doing civil unrest, but I would tell you that that's hopefully something that we don't have to do a lot of. And I know that, we're working throughout the state, other resources are being worked for that. But at the end of the day, if we have to do it, we train to do it. But ideally, in a perfect world, we won't be out there supporting civil unrest operations.
Just one question. So you said of all the 100 positions, you've got 107, so you're like over.
So our strength, our strength is roughly about 107% on the Army National Guard. So if there's 100 positions in a unit, we have about 107. Now that includes service members that are deployed, that are conducting basic training and advanced individual training. So we don't have 107% available to do all of our missions because we have some in the training pipeline, but yes, that's an accurate number.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah, well, it's one of the top in the nation. But we're not resting on that because we know the struggle with and we're all kind of fishing in the same pond. I mean, you look what unemployment is in the state of Minnesota, so. It's a struggle to get our service members, and we want to maintain that percentage so that we can continue to be as effective and really, as the governor articulated, continue to do our mission professionally and really try to set Minnesota above the rest with the other National Guard states.
Governor, last year you got the veterans bonuses done in a year that was pretty unsuccessful otherwise at the legislature. What will be your move in the next legislative session? Will there be more bonuses? Will there be something else you ask
for? We spent about 40 hours traveling talking about this, so I'll just mention, I appreciate that. And I appreciate, Esme, that's a really good answer. These are questions that I say, I think there's people that think you just push the button and folks can do this. At one point, I think I was a little inarticulate explaining this. Soldiers have many military occupational specialties that they train for. Like these folks over here are doing all of the theater outpressing of folks coming out, making sure all their paperwork's done, all their travel orders, all of those types of things. These are an important piece of this. I think when people think of soldiers, they think of the combat arms piece of this, and certainly every airman and every soldier is trained to do those things, but it's not what you do every day. And so I am very concerned when we pull people out of training or we ask them to do that. And General Menke's right. This is the healthy conversation of military and civilian leadership of discussing what the capabilities are and when we use them. And General Menke's right. He was deeply concerned, as we were, of using the National Guard in the long-term care facilities, and it came to the situation that there really wasn't much of an alternative. I can tell you this, that this does not surprise me, but it's pretty stunning. I talked to some of these residents who talked about they were happier with the National Guard replacement. I don't mean this in any disrespect to the people who were there. It was just a different type of thing that was happening, and they were certainly happy because someone showed up. But I appreciate your question, because these are things I think about is where do you hit that red line where you go too far and somebody says, I've got children, I've got a civilian job, I run my own business, and I've been asked to do this, 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 and this. These tend to be people who are kind of in the servant leadership thing, so they want to deploy and do these missions. The question is, are we giving them the tools? Are we giving them the training? And as General Menke knows, and I say this, and these leaders up here will say this, is there has got to be a stated end state at the beginning of these before you do it. How do we get out of this? How do we disengage from these missions, and what's the plan to get there before we do it? And I think that's a really critical piece that we have to go. Theo, I'll go back to you again.
Would you like me to repeat it?
Yeah.
It's around the veterans bonuses from last year.
Yeah.
You got that done.
Yeah, it was great.
And what is your next ask of the legislature this year? Is it more bonuses to try to aid the recruitment for people?
And so I'm anecdotally asking people on this. They don't just re-up for the bonuses, but when I ask people, they said the bonuses help make it a lot easier. I keep saying this, we need to come up with a plan that makes it easier for people to stay yes in their busy lives. And I have to be honest, just as a off the cuff, we'll put this together because we're still looking at our things. One of the things a Pennsylvania Guard member mentioned to me is they started a new program there that allowed dependent children to use the educational benefits for 10 semesters at a Pennsylvania school. those are the types of things I've asked General Menke and the Sergeant Major and the Chief to start asking their troops, what are things that would help us in that retention piece of this? And so as we put our budget together, I think you can expect to see some of that. I am going to ask too, we did the post 9/11 bonuses like we did since World War I on. Last year in the legislature, they shrunk the ability to be able to get those to folks, the residency requirement a little bit than what I had proposed. I'd like to go back again and expand that out because I think we left some people out of that I want to make sure they're added, because I've talked to a lot of veterans post 9/11. We're grateful for that. Not just the money, it certainly helped, but the sense of that. And so there'll be a lot coming back on that. And you're right, Theo, in a unproductive legislative session, real success around an omnibus military VA budget. I would like to state, and I would hope the legislature is an independent body, as we all know, and they will do what they need to do. I would hope that there's a desire to continue that tradition now of military VA omnibus separate from all the rest of the budgeting. Seems like that would be something we could tackle. So I know that General Menke, his team here with the Chief and Sergeant Majors are going to come with some proposals.
Real quick question, it's kind of recruitment related, but it's kind of off topic. Recruiting people to move to Minnesota.
Yeah.
What can you talk about that, say about that?
Man, that was a nice segue. We'll leave him up here. Yeah, I've been talking about this, and I think some of it's the Minnesota nice. I want to be very careful about not falling into Minnesota exceptionalism. I think we need to fall back on data. Myself is an example of this. I came to this state because you paid teachers more, education was important, there were more things to do as a young person. My wife was, of course, a native and had told me those things, that not all states are created equal. And I think Minnesota does many, many things well. And I think that we have maybe not been as aggressive as we could about selling those points. And I think we're going to see partners in that across the spectrum, from the business community to others that want to see us do that. And I think that is what we're doing. I mean, the Minnesota National Guard are our great ambassadors, and I saw them do this with a couple of people who were members of other states' National Guard and are coming to us because and I said, good for them. And I'll have to tell you this, my State Patrol security escort who was with me, when he introduced himself, mentioned that the State Patrol is hiring to everybody. So I think that there's that effort, and I'm asking beyond Explore Minnesota, that I think we need to make, and again, some of this is touting things that have always been there, but candidly, some of it's reputation repair, to let people know what's really here, to let them know what we're doing, to let them know what assets we have. And I think it's fair. A lot of states do this, and I had mentioned I hate seeing these advertisements from other states. We have a lot to offer, and I think we should be putting that out there, because I know that I, as a teacher, to know what the state of Minnesota values in education and communities value in education, if I'm a teacher, this is a state you want to teach in, because it's a good place.
Also, kind of on the topic of recruiting, you had hoped by mid-December or so to start filling those 6 commissioner slots that became open. Where are you at, and is it going to be something you'll have done by the time you take your second term?
Yeah, we've been on this, and I want to thank the people. We have some incredible applicants who are in this. The first line of applicants are in, and the first interviews have been done. I've participated in a couple of those so far. I will be participating this week, which I think by Friday, I think we will have the bulk of them hopefully move through interview process. So we'll be able to share more, I hope, sometime next week or after that. But my goal is still that, and we said we wanted to have them placed by the end of December. I think we will. And again, really grateful for the talent pool that stepped forward.
How many troops are there in the National Guard, the Minnesota National Guard?
Total.
13,560.
Yeah, so when you combine both the Air and the Army, it's right around 13,000. I'd have to get the exact number, but I think it's just under 13,000, with about 2,150 on the air side, the rest being Army.
Can you talk briefly about how long Minnesotans will be in? It sounds like some are coming home from deployments, but maybe others are going to be going after that.
And I would tell you, this year, the point we're at right now is probably one of the least mobilized times for the Minnesota National Guard for the federal mission. So it's a real light year for us. But, we obviously, the process goes, you get a notification of sourcing, and then you get a deployment order, and we will continue to deploy both airmen and soldiers when asked by the federal government or ordered by the federal government to do so. And like I said, this particular time is really by no means a high point, but we have, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we have continued to deploy soldiers and airmen since 9/11, and really that has not hiccuped since COVID, civil unrest, all the stuff that we've gone through in the state of Minnesota the last couple of years.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Governor, can I ask you a TikTok question? There are, seriously, some governors have banned the use of TikTok on government-owned devices for their employees. Are you considering doing that, or have
Our
you
whole
done?
team, I think, is looking at social media holistically. The issue around Twitter and kind of the message that's now there that can tend to be somewhat dangerous, and then the issue of TikTok, of course, with the connections to the Chinese government. I've asked our team to start thinking about that, put together some recommendations around that. I think this is an ever-evolving area. When I tell people, when Minute, our tech folks tell me, I'm going to get this number wrong, but I can assure you it's in the thousands, if not the 10,000s, of attacks on our systems every day that they are fighting off. Every day there are thousands to 10,000s of attempted attacks on state assets, and we saw that during the civil unrest. That was both state and non-state actors attempting to do that, and I think those are questions that I've asked us to look at a little more broader sense of what does social media look like, just both in the usage of it out of our office and the risks that it brings. So I think there'll be a little more comprehensive on that. We're certainly well aware of it and watching it, not just the social aspect of the messaging, but the danger of potential loss of data and things like that that come with that needs to be addressed. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. General, thank you.